Welcome back. It's Becca. I'm going to talk a little bit more about patterns, and we're going to show you what you get when you open up an envelope pattern and what you're looking at and why you should look at it. First thing you see when you open up an envelope pattern is you see two things. You see this kind of heavy-duty paper, and then you'll see this really cheap paper. This is your pattern. The larger section is your pattern, so it's the actual pieces that you need to cut out to make your object. And then you'll see the little leaflets with lots of writing on it. These are the instructions. Most times they're in at least 2 languages. A lot of people really ignore these. There are reasons that you shouldn't, and I'll tell you why. When you open up, you'll have more than one page. On the first page, you'll have a few things. You'll have things like you'll have another drawing of the object, and then you'll have a list of the pattern pieces. These are the actual pieces that you have to cut out to get your object. So rather than shuffle through this entire thing, just cutting them all out, it's probably easier for you to just go through and find the numbers that you need for whatever object you're making, rather than cut it all out and then try and stuff it back in your envelope and it becomes a pain in the butt. These envelopes are kind of wussy, so I have multiple ones that ripped and I've taped back together, or I just moved into a different envelope. The manila envelopes, those document folders, are really great if you rip up a envelope, because then you can cut your envelope in half and then like loop tape it on. But there's also things like your cutting layout. Your cutting layout, which is this right here. Your cutting layout is how you should lay out your pieces to get the most out of your fabric. It's the way to conserve fabric. They give you like the best ideas, things to think about when you're doing grain, things like that. Also patterns. So you've got your cutting layout, you've got the objects you need, and then 9 times out of 10 there'll be like a glossary. So when they tell you what to do, and you don't know, like, well, what does that word mean? Well, you can look it up on the pattern if you don't want to Google it, or if you don't feel like going all the way to your computer because you're cutting. But you know, that's just like kind of what you get when you see this. There's also the instructions. The instructions, I'll be honest with you, I don't read the instructions. I haven't in a very long time unless I get stuck. The instructions are great if you get stuck. A lot of times I make more use out of like the pictures, because they have great little drawings that come with every step that tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. Those are phenomenal. Those are really helpful. But you know, the other thing you get is you get your pattern. Your pattern is on this really thin, really awkward feeling tissue paper. There are some pluses and some negatives. Positive and negative is it's really thin. It's really thin because then it rips a lot, and then you'll end up taping it back together. And if you rip it on accident, because if you slide it, the pins can rip it sometimes. But you know, because it's really thin, you can see through it. And if you're doing like a pattern, it's really great for like matching pattern pieces, because then you can match like pieces and you'll see it through the actual thing before you even cut it. So you're like, oh hey, there's this huge heart. Oh wait, I'm cutting it like a third of it off with the front. Well, I actually kind of want that on like the center, front and center of my dress. So slide. That's really nice. But because it is thin, it's really wussy. Like really wussy. They rip really easily, so you have to be a little bit careful. When you actually cut out a piece, I'm going to show you a little things, 1 or 2 things that you can do on the piece. Things on the actual piece, pattern piece. So, like first thing you'll see is this giant arrow line. It's got 2 arrows on it. That is your grain line. That is how you want to line up your grain on your fabric so that it cuts and lays right. It's also really helpful for patterns if you're trying to keep a pattern the same direction. Again, that's also where the tissue comes in really handy, because you can see through it because it's really thin and wussy. Another thing you'll see is all of them will have these little notches on sides. Those are really important. That's your lineup mark, so that everything lines up properly. You're going to line up from like this notch to the other notch, and then sew it down, because if you don't line it up at the notches, it might sit crooked, you might have sewn it awkwardly, things like that. That helps keep your patterns straight and your pieces straight so that they all lay out right. Another thing that you'll see is this double line set on some of them. Not all pattern pieces have the double line. The double line is what's called an extension or shortening line. It's where you can extend your pattern, make it longer. Like say I need sleeves that go all the way to the floor, and I want to keep them proportional. If you'll notice, the sleeve has an angle on it. this area is where you can pull it down because this is where it's like the evenest, or the most even, rather than the evenest. And you can then pull it apart here, and this is where you'll extend it, rather than just keep going here, because then it'll get so small that it won't look right, and it'll look a little awkward. Another thing that you'll notice is there are dots, and there's a little word that's called ease. Your ease is where you can like gather or stretch it a little bit to make sure that it fits all the way around and you have a little bit of room in it. It's really important with these dots are like the ease areas or the gather areas. If you're doing like a really puffy sleeve, the dots will be like where you gather to make your actual puff. And the reason why you stay within these dots is because if you don't, it'll be really awkward when you're wearing it, and it'll get really uncomfortable, especially like this because it's a sleeve. It's a little awkward to have like a lot of fabric bunched up underneath your arm. It can be really uncomfortable. And the last thing that you'll see, which is probably the thing you'll see first, is the pattern information. Okay, this is got the number and name of your pattern. It's got the pattern piece number. This is the actual number of this piece for this pattern set. And then it'll tell you what it is, which ones it works with. Like this is a sleeve for a jacket. It says A and B. Well, this jacket pattern had A, B, C, and D, but the sleeve is only for jackets A and B. So then you'll see like how many to cut. You need 2 of the actual fabric you're using, and then you need 2 of a lining. That's really important when you're cutting like interfacing, so that you know how much interfacing you need to cut, or because sometimes they'll do like a front and a back piece and they'll tell you to interface both of them or interface one of them. It's kind of like when you do a collar, you'll cut 2 pieces of fabric and then 1 piece of interfacing, because you'll only interface one side of it rather than all of it, because if you don't, it'll be really stiff and awkward, and it'll probably be very uncomfortable to wear. Okay, this is the basics of the pattern and the pattern envelope and what's in it. We'll talk a little bit more later on like actual alterations of patterns and what to do next and where to go from there. So till next time, see you later.